The 2024 draft is all wrapped up, and we're going to start looking at the Buffalo Bills selections this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome in, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin, and I will be your host today. And today we're going to start talking about the Bills' newest additions that obviously came through the draft. I want to say some highs and lows, but honestly, there's not much about this draft that I don't like. Obviously, this is from the immediate reaction, the seeing the names, the kind of like projecting fits. I'm not a big fan of, the immediate grades. I think that's all, fun on paper, and it's content that goes out there because we're now in like the desert that is the off season. So, it's something that fills the void. But my initial reaction is this might be my favorite draft since Bean has been to Buffalo. Obviously taking Josh Allen out of the equation. But just kind of the way that he sets himself up before the draft to kind of fill holes. And then the way that he attacked the positions of need that we still had on this team and kind of built out looking towards the future while an eye on, immediate success. I think it kind of had a little bit of everything for me. And I think my overall takeaway from this, and this is going to be kind of the exercise we do today, is not so much breaking down the players themselves. We got plenty of time to do that throughout the summer. But just kind of the way Bean attacked the draft from what this team needed. And I think like the order he did things, I really enjoyed. The way he moved around in the draft to kind of go after his guys, while also sliding around, moving back, collecting more picks. I think we as fans so often have the eye on like the immediate success, and we're down to stretch the cap, we're down to trade away all of our picks to go up and trade the next 3 years worth of draft picks to go get Marvin Harrison Jr. All that stuff that we love to do as fans. Like, it's fun, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, like, these guys are building teams that they want to be successful for the next 10 years. These guys are trying to put together teams year in and year out that aren't going to get them fired. So, there's a certain amount of the approach of like, screw it, trade everything, let's go win a Super Bowl. And, we saw it work for the Rams. I'm not sure that's a model that I would want to go after. So I like the way that this kind of reset some of the needs, kind of address positions that Bean actively decided to kind of reset the money on and get younger at. And I think that this has a chance to make us better now and certainly lays the groundwork for future years. So we'll start off right in round one. I'm just going to kind of run through real quick who the players were in case, you made it to this podcast somehow and didn't pay attention to the draft. But round one, we trade back twice and move out of the first round altogether. Moving back to pick 33, ends up being wide receiver Keon Coleman. I'm back in the second with the pick of Cole Bishop, safety. DeWayne Carter, defensive tackle. Ray Davis, running back. Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, who's a center. This one's fun. Have some grace with me on this one. We'll work through it. Edefuan Ulofoshio, linebacker, Javon Solomon, edge, Tylan Grable, offensive tackle, Daequan Hardy, cornerback, and Travis Clayton, guard out of England. So right off at the top, Keon Coleman. If you've listened to the show, Keon Coleman was not my target at wide receiver. There's a lot of names that I wanted before Coleman, and here we are. So I'm not going to sit here and, brood and be mad at the Bills, all this. There's different flavors of receiver, and he wouldn't have been the flavor that I was going for. But now that, kind of the hay's in the barn, it makes total sense to me. You lost Gabe Davis. This is kind of, for easy way of looking at it, this is the improved version of Gabe Davis. Better route running, better hands, better speed, more consistent, but he's still going to give you that, the blocking ability, all the kind of intangibles that the team loved from Gabe Davis. And don't get it twisted. They absolutely loved Gabe Davis. And if, it wasn't for him going out and getting a $15 million contract, if he could be a cheap player to be on this roster again, he would still be on this team. It was just kind of a decision to let that money reset. And I think this is also kind of with the idea in mind of, they were planning on replacing Gabe Davis in this draft. They weren't planning on replacing Diggs. I think that Diggs situation just kind of popped up, and they took their medicine and took an L on that one, but it wasn't in the plans. So that kind of gets me to the point of, were we going to see that position fully replaced in 1 year? And I think that was kind of the idea that started being in the heads of, let's make a major move up and replace Diggs in 1 year. To me, this kind of signals like we like the guys we have, but it's also like on a 2-year plan. And we'll see what happens. There's still a ton of offseason to go. There could still be a trade in the works. But as it stands now, I'm kind of really excited to see what this group we have assembled looks like. Like I said, my flavor of receiver for this draft was going to be more of a separator. But there's also, some factors that we haven't really seen yet of, like, I find myself continuously kind of sleeping on Curtis Samuel no matter how excited I am for him. And I think it's just kind of, like where he's played and like who he's played with. I don't know about you, but Washington football hasn't been very exciting. That hasn't been my go-to team to watch. But looking at, the speed element that a lot of people wanted, the separation element that I wanted, the ability to move them all over the field, Curtis Samuel has all of that. Curtis Samuel's been productive with terrible quarterback play. So I think kind of low-key shakes out a little bit better than I'm giving it credit for. Then you add in Shakir, who absolutely blew up last year. Kincaid, Cook, there's options all over the place. Knox. So I'm excited to see how it works out. And like I said from the beginning, I'm never one, with my pride on the line. I'm worried about being right or wrong. Keon Coleman wouldn't have been my choice. I'm kind of at the point of giving Brandon Beane the benefit of the doubt. I think he's had some great drafts, and pretty much at every turn when I think I know something that Beane doesn't know, I've been wrong. I wanted Josh Rosen and not Josh Allen. Last year, I was super concerned about the middle linebacker position, and the year before didn't understand the Bernard pick. I was wrong about that. Just all kinds of things that I've been wrong about. I will say that, the immediate aftermath of the draft, the first videos we're seeing of Coleman, he seems like he's going to be super fun, super easy to root for. And I'm not afraid of coming out and saying I was wrong about a player. And I sure hope that I get to end up being wrong on this one. Cole Bishop in the second round. This is a position that, again, if you listen to the shows, I talked a ton about how, Bean and McDermott and Babbage have been able to develop safeties, and I'm not worried about, a significant investment in the position. We kind of already addressed the position. Take a flyer on a guy late in the draft and let McDermott and Babbage coach him up and develop him. That being said, this is a guy that I pretty consistently tried to get when I was doing mock drafts. I think all those things that I've said about the position remain true. I still trust Babbage and McDermott to coach these players up. And I just kind of think about what the safety position has looked like and meant for this team with, late round picks, converted cornerbacks, cast-offs from other teams. And it's super hard not to get excited about, a guy coming in that has actual pedigree and, is expected to be an impact starter. So I think we did round out some depth there in the offseason. I think that being said, at the very least, to start the season, Bishop's going to be, in sub packages. I think there's a good chance that before the season even starts, he's a starter. If not, I think throughout the season, he ends up being a guy that's starting for us. So love that pick. Then moving into DeWayne Carter. Again, not somebody that was super high on my radar. Pretty much these picks going forward, this is going to be where we get more in depth as we move throughout the offseason. But just positionally, defensive tackle, edge, these are two positions that I talked about all throughout the offseason of how, yes, I want to add a lot of receiver talent. I also had edge, safety, and defensive tackle as, kind of my other priority needs on this team. So we get three of my biggest needs knocked out first 3 rounds. A lot of people didn't like the trade back with Kansas City. That nets us this pick to be able to take Carter in the third. I think just being able to work behind the guys in front of him and Ed Oliver and Daquan Jones, and he's going to get significant snaps as a rookie, but giving him some time to develop, really become an impact player, and this is a pick that I also get myself really excited about. I'm going to take a quick break, and on the other side, we're going to talk quickly about the remainder of the draft and just kind of what the plan looks like going forward. Stick around.
Hey, this is Dick DeGroat, Bill's dad. Now back to the show.
Welcome back in, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast. If you made it this far, I do, as always, ask that you like, share, subscribe. We got content coming out year-round. So as we move past the draft, we get the next little mini wave of free agency, trades, anything else that could be happening. Just make sure you're subscribed so you're not missing anything. I'm going to pick back up here with the selection of Ray Davis, running back. And I would say that this is probably kind of the first area where, at least positionally, I would have kind of had a different approach. Like I said, there's there's a lot of guys in this draft, being in the scouting department, put in way more work than I do. So the names themselves aren't so much what I look at immediately after the draft, as much as like, did they see similar positional needs? For me, I would have been looking towards edge a little bit earlier. About this time in the draft, I kept seeing Muhammad Kamara sitting there, a guy that I really wanted the Bills to go get. We obviously see them add Javon Solomon and just a few more picks here. So I would have had edge as a little bit of a higher priority, but I do like the addition of running back here. It was a pretty glaring need for this team, and hopefully we get some high upside here, and it's, that number 2 running back position isn't something that we have to be thinking about every offseason. It's part of the reason why I would have deprioritized this is, we've seen the Bills add guys like Ty Johnson that were kind of really cheap deals that were afterthoughts, and we've gotten great production out of players like that. So it wasn't like a super urgent need for me, but still a need nonetheless. Next pickup was center Sedrick Van Pran-Granger, quite the mouthful there. And this is a pick that actually gets me really excited. Obviously, we let Mitch Morse go this year, right? And, we're talking about moving McGovern to center. Who does that bring in as guard? Is it Edwards? And not only was this offensive line really great last year, but didn't miss any games together. We didn't really have to test out the depth on anything. And, then we move into this offseason and we're starting to shuffle the deck. So I didn't love that. But I think this is kind of a situation where we see positions like center go later in the draft just because it's not the top priority positions, right? And I'm not saying that he is going to be a day one starter, but I think there is a path to him ending up as a starter on this team and maybe being able to move McGovern back to guard. I don't think this is just a pick that was made for, just some sort of depth addition. I think this is a player that they like, and, it's in the cards for him to be a starter at one point. Next pick, linebacker. Oof. I'm going to have to get used to this one. Edefuan Ulofoshio. And just in general, kind of here through the rest of the draft, I like the way they attacked positions where we decided to make some resets. And these aren't going to be like, the sexiest additions that have impacts, but we have to look at, a team that has prioritized special teams for so long. Some of the losses that we've had there, and Medikevich and, Saran Neal and aging AJ Klein, just all these players that have just kind of been constantly there on special teams. And we didn't really think about it. So those positions do have to be reset. And it's kind of been one of my talking points for a while is like, yes, I value special teams. It's an important part of the game. But I was never in love with, paying decent contracts to all these guys. I kind of always wanted to be built with, a couple of those guys and then filled out through the draft and these tail end picks where you have guys that may or may not be making the team. You can get some impact special teamers here. So I like that. And also just, how much our linebacker depth was tested last year. Obviously, and we lose Dodson in free agency. So you got to start restocking the cabinets there. Tylan Grable, I'm be honest, this is probably the pick that I know the least about. We're going to look more at him in future episodes. But I do like the idea of, again, we're bringing in trench depth. You're looking at it right now, just what we have across the offensive line. I don't think it ever hurts to have more bodies in the building developing. And especially when you're looking at one of the guys being Tommy Doyle in the room. He's had 2 season-ending knee injuries in the past 2 years. So somebody that we were excited about a few years ago, unfortunately, just a super unfortunate bad luck start to his career. But you got to kind of hedge against that. Daequan Hardy, cornerback, it's the next pick. Something really exciting about him and a way that he could carve out a path to possibly making the roster. So he does have a lot of special teams ability. He's done a lot of return duties. Bean even talked about it in like his post-draft pressers about, with the new kickoff rules, this might be somewhere where he can carve out a role. So I think that's exciting to have in the mix because our return duties are kind of up in the air right now. Hardy handled a lot of that last year. He's obviously gone now. So we'll see what shakes out there. I don't think the job's going to be handed to Daequan Hardy here, but I think it at least provides a path to these late round picks possibly making the roster when we've seen, over the past few seasons, practice squad guys getting plucked from other teams. And then the last pick of the draft from the International Pathways program from England, Travis Clayton. And again, I don't have a ton to say about this player because he hasn't played football. This star rugby player coming over in the International Pathway program. But I will say what I like about this pick is I have a plus and minus on this pick because on one hand, somewhere between rounds like 4 through 7, I would have liked to have taken another receiver. I think that kind of goes into Bean and McDermott probably being a little bit higher on the wide receiver group that we have in-house than I am. But on the other hand, I low-key really like this pick because it gives us an extra practice squad spot and he doesn't count against the roster. So for me, I'm looking at this as, like I said, we've had a few drafts where our late round picks are getting plucked from our practice squad to go to other teams. Just with the success that we've had, especially, with some of the positions, offensive linemen, secondary, things like that. That's kind of the positions that are getting targeted by other teams. And we've seen it a few different times with different players that we never even really saw play a snap, and, Jack Anderson and Rashad Wild Goose, and there's been a few others. So for me, this is kind of like, if you look at it as like, this pick probably would have got plucked anyways, and now you have, that extra practice squad spot and a guy who's a talented athlete who, has a bunch of traits, and you give him to Aaron Cromer, fantastic offensive line coach, and see what he can get out of him. And it was a very small investment, and what the ceiling on this is kind of unknown. Like I said, we haven't seen a snap of football. There's no tape to watch. There's no highlight reel. So some people are calling this kind of a throwaway pick, and I can get that logic. But for me, it's kind of like I look at it as more as like of an experiment of hey, we have a great offensive line coach. We have this guy with a whole bunch of talent and ability, and maybe it's something that plays out really well, and I'd assume it would take 2-3 years to get there. Who knows? We'll see what happens there. But that's your 2024 draft. Kind of looking forward, I think we're going to have a few episodes here where not much is happening Bills news-wise. We did see the Bills added Quintez Cephas out of Detroit. We'll get into him a little bit more next week. But just kind of looking at the plan going forward, I don't anticipate much movement of anything till June. We've seen a ton of things about all these, big name receivers that could be available for trade, all that, blah, blah, blah. I'm not convinced that Bean is done with the wide receiver room. I don't know that one of those big names would be in play, but also we've seen Brandon Bean take some pretty big swings throughout his tenure here. When you're talking surprise trade for Stephon Diggs, surprise, addition of Von Miller, and the addition of Von Miller in a year where he was like, hey guys, we have no money, don't expect a big splash, and then made a gigantic splash. I don't anticipate anything like that happening till at least beginning of June, when we get that $10 million freed up from the loss of Trey White. So it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening there. Like I said, we have through August for Bean to be done tinkering with this roster. So I don't think he's done by any stretch of the imagination. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Drop a comment. Let us know what you thought about the draft, what you would have done differently, what your favorite pick is, what your least favorite pick is. Give us some feedback. And in the meantime, I'm going to polish up on these selections now that we know who is actually on the team, and we will talk more about them as we move through the offseason. But thank you, as always, for joining me on this episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, and we will see you next week. Go Bills!